This is Danielle Dardashti, host of The Nightingale of Iran, a riveting documentary podcast I made with my sister Galit. Our Jewish grandfather was a radio star in Iran, adored by Muslims. It was a mystery to us why he left during that golden age. We uncovered painful secrets, unspoken for generations. The Nightingale of Iran on all podcast platforms.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 448, The Unbinding of Isaac. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're continuing our series of episodes exploring the upcoming high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Last week, we spoke with Tzvika Krieger about the theology of the high holidays, and if you've been listening to our bonus episodes during the month of Elul, the month of reflection, leading up to Rosh Hashanah, you know that Lex and Wendy have been exploring what this particular new year can mean as we enter the third year of our 7-year sabbatical cycle. This week, we welcome back a dear friend of the show, past guest and Yeshiva teacher extraordinaire, Jericho Vincent, to talk about what they have planned at Temple of the Stranger, the Goddess-centered, mystical, embodied, experiential, heart-nourishing, rooted in Jewish ancestral wisdom and open to all temple that Jericho leads, and how that might change the way we can experience the high holidays, even if we aren't in Brooklyn. Before we dive in, a reminder about the Yeshiva. A few of our classes have already started this week if you're listening when the episode is just released, but it's not too late to sign up. You can register for whichever class you want at judaismunbound.com/classes, and you'll get access to the recording of the first class, so you can just watch it and catch right up. And we've also got a few classes that haven't quite kicked off yet, but they're going to soon, so you should register right away. One explores the month of Elul with Wendy Bernstein-Lash. One is on the Kol Nidre declaration from the Yom Kippur liturgy with Lex Rofberg. And one is on Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism with Daniel Kraft, our past guest who is one of the founders of Gashmius magazine, which explores progressive Neo-Hasidism. So again, head over to judaismunbound.com/classes to check them out and to register. So now let's dive into today's episode with our guest, Jericho Vincent. Jericho Vincent is the rabbi and founder of Temple of the Stranger, which welcomes those who are Jewish, Jewish, and not Jewish at all. They regularly convene pieces of immersive spiritual theater, radical ceremonies, wisdom talks, and a lot more. And of particular interest to this episode, they're gathering an event called The Unbinding of Isaac to mark Rosh Hashanah this year. A few words of introduction for Jericho Vincent. Jericho Vincent is a scion of a notable rabbinic ultra-Orthodox family, but they were expelled from their community as a teenager for their rebellions and for their questions. After years of learning from Buddhist, Sufi, and atheist teachers, Jericho Vincent returned to Judaism on their own terms, excavating lost wisdom from our female, trans, mystical, and queer ancestors. A first-generation college student, Jericho Vincent earned an undergraduate degree at Brooklyn College as a night student on a presidential scholarship, and they hold a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where they were a four-timer fellow. Jericho Vincent has rabbinic ordination from the Aleph Ordination Program in the lineage of Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, and currently serves as an advisor to the Institute for Jewish Spirituality's Clergy Leadership Program and to Beit Kohenet, and also as a board member of the Shalom Center. Jericho Vincent is also a member of Benot Esh, a Jewish feminist spirituality collective, as well as being a Wexner Fellow, a member of the Schusterman ROI community, and a recent fellow at ATRA, the Center for Rabbinic Innovation. Jericho Vincent has also been named to the Jewish Week's 36 Under 36 and the Forward 50 lists of the most influential Jews around. So Jericho Vincent, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you on again.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back.
All right, so we're talking about the high holidays these days, and I guess I want to start by asking you, if I'm a person who has either not really gone to high holiday services very often because I don't find much there that moves me, or I'm a person who does go to high holidays regularly, but kind of is doing it out of a sense of that's what I'm supposed to do, but isn't really having a earth-shaking kind of experience there, can you give me a window into what the high holidays could be that might give me something to aspire to?
Sure, I can try. So, I think that the ancestors carved into the calendar this time by year after year after year, investing this time of the year with their hopes and their dreams and their rituals around themes of renewal and repair. And so there's just this enormous well of energy waiting for us to tap into it. And I'm not sure that the average synagogue does a great job of tapping deeply into that well, but I think it's there. And I think for folks, particularly this year, who are looking to take stock of the difficult year that's passed, who are looking to rejuvenate, who are looking for clarity for their own sense of purpose and how they might navigate the coming year, who are looking to repair wounds and conflicts in their lives, this energy is just there. It's a gift that we have the opportunity to tap into, and it can be truly transformative.
So can you say a little bit more about, from your perspective, where these energies come? Like, for example, why are we doing this in the fall as opposed to in the spring when we have Passover? Or is it just kind of like, no, there's all these energies always around and we have different holidays to kind of foreground different energies or different things? I mean, like, how do you look at the whole Jewish calendar as far as what the purposes of these holidays could be?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the energies are always around. There's this tradition that we can have a Yom Kippur every month if we want it. Some people are like, no, once a year is enough. But I do think that there's something special about this time of year. In spring, I think our bodies naturally feel rejuvenated. But where we really need to get clear and focus is when we're heading into winter. And I love that our high holidays are where they are because we have the stretch of the fall to really get that clarity, to do the repair of what's been past, to prepare for what's coming, so that our winter, our time of hibernation, can be productive and not painful. Or maybe it's painful, but productively painful.
In general, you've now been rocking and rolling with Temple of the Stranger for a few years. And I think that you're taking an approach that excites me and excites us organizationally a lot. You're really starting not from, okay, here's what high holidays look like most of the time, and now we're going to tweak it a little bit. It's much more of a sort of from scratch, not fully from scratch, but like we're going to ask what are the big questions, what are the big topics, what are the big goals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're going to try and achieve those in creative, artistic, embodied, awesome ways. One thing I really love about how you're going about Rosh Hashanah this year, as I understand it, is that you're honing in particular, on one key piece of what is a very overwhelming selection of Rosh Hashanah liturgy. You're honing in on the binding of Isaac narrative. Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and God and that journey up the mountain and that, attempted murder that kind of happens. So,
and just to explain, as we've had before in the podcast, that's the Torah reading generally on the second day of Rosh Hashanah.
Yes. And in some communities, the first day. Yeah. And so I love that story as a check-in moment, as something to really help reflect on our values. I also just love forgetting that story, particularly that you are going deep on one thing. I think it's so hard. Like one of the big problems of many holidays, but especially Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is that it's like, okay, I'm going to try to have 2 minutes of a focus on this thing. Then we're going to switch to this other thing. Oh, we're talking about the new year now. We're talking about the binding of Isaac now. We're talking about atonement now. We're talking about, majesty and God's kingliness or whatever and the traditional, like total overwhelm. And this is focused. So can you talk to us about why that binding of Isaac narrative and also just like what's about to happen in your community related to it?
Yeah. One of the gifts of not being a synagogue or something else, or a mystical community, is that we don't feel obligated to offer everything. So I don't think it's possible. I think it's very hard to sustain a peak experience for 24 hours, let alone 48. And so we have decided to just do a 3-hour service for Rosh Hashanah, a 3-hour service for Yom Kippur, and to try to give people a peak experience during that time. And we have this overabundance of resources from the ancestors. They just kept stuffing more and more things in. And there's a lot of gifts there, but I think that there's some challenges. And I think let's touch all the bases, we end up losing out on what the purpose of the whole thing is. So when I sit down to explore what are we trying to help emerge, what portal are we trying to open these high holidays, I'm always looking for one thing. And I think there's often like a sense that there are 2 or 3 things in the air that people need. And most people don't need 47 different themes. And I was very drawn to the Unbinding of Isaac this year. The questions of intergenerational trauma are super hot right now. And we read this and we read this and we read this. For thousands of years, we have read this story. And I understand that as the ancestors saying, our lives are too traumatic to actually deal with it. So we're just going to pass it on and hope that some point in the future, somebody can help us with this. And I think we're at that time where we have some resources. We are gifted to live in a time where we understand some things about trauma and healing that folks did not know for a long time or didn't have the resources to access. And I want to offer that gift to the ancestors and offer that gift to each other. Okay, here's a super traumatic story that is sort of a myth or maybe an actual historical story that touches something really deep for a lot of us about what it's like when we carry intergenerational trauma. And now what are we going to do with that? Our Rosh Hashanah service is built around that question. Isaac needs justice. We cannot heal from this story without justice. So we're building this immersive theater piece where we explore, what does justice for Isaac look like? What do the texts tell us? What do our bodies tell us? What emerges when we really connect with these stories in a deeply personal way? And what healing might become available to each of us individually when we do that?
And the next piece is that you decided on this one particular story to focus on, but it wasn't like you stopped there. I mean, there could be an alternate universe where somebody looks at the sum total of Rosh Hashanah material, they land on the Binding of Isaac or the Unbinding of Isaac. I like that frame as an unbound organization. But like, they could decide, oh, we're going to hone in on that, which means we're going to do the Torah service for that Torah reading. We're going to have like a Torah study where we look at that story together as a group. I also think that might be meaningful, but it's different from where you went, which is my understanding of what's about to happen in your community is that there's going to be an immersive experience where you're actually like interacting with Isaac and Sarah and Abraham and God, maybe the angel. And there's going to be this like judgment, but I can't tell if there's going to be a ruling of guilty, not guilty, or how it's going to work. But that sounds really exciting to me because it's not just like a meta ritual where you're talking about a story. You're in the story. It actually feels like Passover, where like we sort of inhabit the story of being slaves in Egypt and becoming free. So can you talk to us about that side of it and some of the particulars of what this trial is going to look like?
Yeah. I mean, I have a real allergy to this sort of archaeological Judaism where it sometimes feels like there's this sense that, God died 2,000 years ago. And so we go to the old texts when God was still alive and we really like work over those old texts in an attempt to try to reach through the words to touch God. I love the sacred texts. They're so important to me. And also I feel God, divinity alive right now in this moment. And I want to give people that direct experience that in their bodies and in our relationships right now, we can access something true. And, it was great the ancestors packed themselves into the text at a time when their bodies were at risk, but we have more safety in our bodies now. It's time to come back to our bodies. People will have a chance to meet a version of Abraham and Sarah and the God of patriarchy and an angel and Isaac and see what's it feel like in your body when you enter this story. Because I think these stories have survived for so long because they speak to something that's very familiar in our daily lives. And when we keep it just on the level of the text, it gets in the way of us feeling that deeper connection and us actually moving past the reading of the script, the table read, and finally entering the action. I think it's time for us to enter the action.
What you're saying makes so much sense, but I am thinking, like, if you think that God died 2,000 years ago, like, why are you interested in touching God if God is dead? I mean, that's such an interesting perspective, which you're free to kind of keep going on. But I'm really interested in what you were talking about earlier. And by the way, like, we've talked about this offline a fair bit. What you comfortably call God, I basically believe in the same thing. I just generally don't call it God. So I'm very into what you're saying, and I'm able to live translate for myself, and I think that our listeners will be also. I really want to explore this question that you were talking about, that we have tools today that our ancestors didn't have. I think you're talking about how to process intergenerational trauma. Those tools essentially, and I think you would agree with this, essentially represent the living God, right? That the idea that our, what B'nai Lappi calls svara, right, our sort of deep moral intuitions, which are, I think, part of God, the way that you're talking about it, continue to teach us things today that our ancestors didn't know, is exactly, at least in my view, what it means for God to be continuing to live.
Yeah. Well, thank you for translating the G word for me and for your listeners. Absolutely. I'm not talking about some dude sitting on a cloud in the sky. I'm talking about the life energy within, between, and beyond all beings that I often prefer to use female and non-binary pronouns for. But yeah, I think maybe I'll just respond really frankly by saying, like, I am a person that carries enormous trauma. And so when I look back to my, late teenage years, when I was going through some pretty horrible things, like, I understand that I was not capable of healing myself as I was accumulating more wounds. And I see over the course of my own life that as I've acquired more safety, I have a spaciousness where I can start to tend to the parts of myself that could only survive. I feel a resonance between my own personal experience and our people's experience. Like, our people underwent enormous traumas and valiantly survived, but didn't have the spaciousness, even if they might have had the wisdom to begin to heal. And now life is not perfect. There's plenty of danger, but we do have more spaciousness than they did. And we also do have more wisdom. And of course, an essential piece of that wisdom is you cannot begin to heal if you have squished 50% of your people because you see them as subhuman. Like, a patriarchal culture is never going to be able to rebalance itself fully. And what a gift to live in a time where we are, in touch with the Torah of feminism and in touch with the Torah of queer liberation and trans liberation that gives us more of that spaciousness and more of the tools we need to begin to address the wounds that we've accumulated over time.
I know we don't want to do like a spoiler alert here, but on the other hand, I think what's going to happen at your experience is going to be multi-sensory, and here we're mostly talking analytic and auditory, so I don't think it would spoil the experience. But can you give a little bit of a sense of, like, well, what tools are we talking about? What are we talking about? Like therapy? Are we talking about like meditation? Like, what tools do we have today that can help people with intergenerational trauma that we didn't have before?
I think one of the most important tools is one of the simplest, which is simply bearing witness. Letting people speak about their harms and listening to them with compassion, not even trying to fix, just listening deeply with compassion. And when everybody's running for their lives, there's no time for that. And so to take a moment and take seriously the wounds we carry from our own lives, from our parents, our grandparents, and beyond, and listen deeply, I think that in itself is an enormous move in the right direction. And when we read the Akedah, because it's such an old story, because we've done this year after year, I don't think, certainly it wasn't my experience growing up, that I related to these people as people like me. That I wondered, what did Sarah really feel about this? What was Isaac like as an old man, and how was his personality shaped by this enormous trauma he endured in his childhood? When we make the space to bear witness, our hearts are opened and we take people in a much deeper level. And I think that that's important for our culture, but it's also important for our own lives. Again, speaking personally, I know some of the most healing moments in my life have been when people have been willing to listen really deeply. And when I found the courage and the space to share the most human, little, seemingly obscure or weird details of the pain and lay it all out in its complexity and feel like it's being witnessed. One of my favorite names for God comes from Hagar, connected to our story of the binding of Isaac. I don't know how exactly to describe her, but secondary partner of Abraham who gets sent away, she calls God El Roi, the divine that bears witness. And I find that really powerful. Sometimes just simply being witnessed can be the most transformative and even magical experience and deeply healing.
I want to talk about the fact that it is possible to give spoilers for your ritual. Mm-hmm. That is cool, right? Like, it's not a normal feature of Jewish ritual. I think that what people tend to expect, and even the fact that they have clear expectations of what a ritual would be, they whether it's Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or any other holiday experience, the idea that you could spoil it is strange, because the notion is that you're doing something that has been done roughly in that way for hundreds or thousands of years. And even if it's a ritual that's only decades old, like, there's still a sense that you couldn't spoil it. Like, you could go to some website and find the liturgy that's being delivered. And sure, maybe there will be differences in how a particular community delivers that. Some might skip this text, some might translate this differently. But like, by and large, you couldn't spoil Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. But the second you said that, my takeaway was like, oh, I just realized another category of Jew I am, or like a category of Jewish events or rituals I want to be part of, which is I want to be part of Jewish experiences that can be spoiled, that could not that I want them spoiled, but like that are surprising, that are expected to be unexpected. I'm a Big Brother fan, and their motto is expect the unexpected. But like, I actually desire to be surprised and not to have my, expectations met precisely in the Jewish spaces I inhabit. And I actually do not think I'm rare. I think some people listening to this, especially folks who are congregational rabbis, or maybe who spend time in more traditional kinds of, and I don't mean traditional in the like Orthodox sense, I just mean like more classic formats of Jewish life. Some of them would say, well, Lex, that's you. And most people, they want to go to synagogue and they want to have melodies that are similar to the previous week, and they want to have people that they recognize. And like, sure, I think that's true, but I actually think we drastically overstate that group, and we drastically understate the group that wants to be surprised, to be sort of injected with a shot of adrenaline or energy in their Jewish experiences, because we've basically created Jewish spaces that don't speak to those folks. And so they don't come, and it's a circular thing where we prioritize the folks who come, who want the comfort and the familiarity. So I'd actually love to interrogate that piece and like really, like, can you help me find language for why we need to be surprised, not just on Rosh Hashanah, why we need to be entering spaces that could be spoiled generally?
I love that so much because, of course, anything that can be spoiled has to be fresh, right? Fresh things can spoil. And I love thinking about what we're trying to tap into as Judaism that is fresh, bursting with life. I think there's two things. I think there's suspense. That's really important. Suspense means there are stakes. And if there are no stakes, how engaged is our deepest heart? And yes, I think there's something to be said for nostalgia and good comfy feelings and all that. But, we go to see movies, we go to see concerts, we're expecting something unexpected. We want the suspense of what's going to happen. My kid is big Swiftie, very into the idea that Taylor Swift always picks some unexpected song and you don't know what it's going to be. And people's lives revolve around whether she's going to pick the right song at the right time, right? Like there are stakes there. And surely there should be stakes for the high holidays. And of course, the ancestors believe that, right? Like there's this whole ritual where the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies and there's a string. And whether the string is white or red, all the people are holding their breath, waiting to find out, right? There's an unexpected there. And I think that
the Groundhog Day of Judaism, we're waiting to see whether the groundhog sees its shadow.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that drama is a gift from the ancestors that it's high time we tap back into.
So I was really interested in what you said about, we're not a synagogue, we're a mystical community. That was such a interesting and just kind of by the way sort of point that you made. But I think it really brings into relief something that is different from a conversation that is usually had in the Jewish community, which is something like, how could synagogues do the high holidays better? Which I think is a really interesting and important conversation. I'm noting it because I think that's not the conversation that we're having here. So the conversation that we're having here is the one that I've always dreamed of having, but in some ways there aren't that many spiritual innovators like you who are starting a new kind of thing that is kind of like, if somebody looked at it, they would say, well, isn't that kind of like a synagogue in a way, but is emphatically saying that it isn't. And that gives this creative possibility that I think is really hard to do. I mean, this is, to put it in business theory, this is the whole basic idea of the theory of disruptive innovation, that as much as you might like to do it in an existing form of an institution, you generally can't. You can do it in a startup, and then eventually that can come over to the existing institution world. So I think everything that we're talking about here is relevant to synagogues, but I think it's exciting to talk about it as sui generis. And so what I'm asking is, what is your process for kind of mining the tradition and deciding what is the one thing? And do you imagine doing that completely new each year so that it really is spoilerable because every year it's going to be completely different? Or do you see like that there have to be these long-term themes, either because of people's own desire to have some kind of predictability? I mean, Taylor Swift chooses one new song for every concert, but all the other songs are the ones that you basically expect her to sing. And I've heard that a lot about Jewish experiences. I mean, at least a lot of rabbis have told me, you can't change things too quickly because then people get off kilter. And frankly, I've experienced that a little bit, granted in a more old school kind of institution that I was trying to change. So I'm curious, when you are doing it in a new type of institution, like how do you manage the process of selecting the thing that's going to be really powerful versus the people's perhaps desire to have something more familiar?
Yeah, I think a balance is definitely necessary. And I hope that the chasm between what I'm doing and the average synagogue doesn't have to be so big. That maybe the average synagogue is like Taylor Swift, and maybe they can figure out there are so many services we cover in the high holidays. Let's do one totally different. I think that there might be enough space for that to happen. For me, yes, there are certain ingredients that have started to emerge that we come back to again and again. And having the discipline of that structure allows us to feel safe in our community, I think, to innovate it. So, for example, we always have a hand washing ritual when we start a big ceremony. Like that is our way of marking exit from normal reality, enter into liminal space. And folks who have come to us for a while know to expect that. And I think that's a grounding of like, I know where I am. I know I might be taken on a ride to somewhere. I don't know where yet, but I feel like I'm in the hands of the people who've taken me on rides before, and those have turned out well. We always, in our big ceremonies, have a chanting ritual. Always. Like we come back to it again and again and again. And I hope the chanting ritual is fresh. There is an element of the unexpected in it, but it's one of the building blocks that we put in there. And so there are like this set of building blocks that we've developed over time, and we insert them, but we are trying to keep those building blocks porous enough and alive enough that they can make space for the unexpected, for people to show up with what they have. I don't know what people are going to bring to Rosh Hashanah, and that's going to change what happens for Isaac. So I do think you can have complete chaos, and I think you can build something that feels structured, that still has a lot of space for transformation and creativity and the unknown.
I'd love to sit more with this notion that rituals need to have stakes. And clarifying, vegetarian, we mean steaks, S-T-A-K-E-S. Nobody thought it was the other kind, but I just can't stop myself. Okay. I so thoroughly agree. And I think that part of what's operating, and I mean this with respect, and I can't really prove this, but I do think that part of what the congregational settings are doing when they prioritize doing things a similar way, it's not just that they don't want to alienate their diehard members. That is part of it. I'm not denying that. I do think there's an allergy to risk. I think it is safer to do a ritual and have the range of possibilities kind of be like, if this goes poorly, it'll be a C or C plus. And if this goes great, it'll be a B or B plus. And like, we're doing everything roughly the same as the best. So we know it's not going to be an F. We know it's not going to fully go off the rails and be catastrophic. It's also not going to be an A plus. Nobody's going to walk out of that room like saying that they soared to the stratosphere. But that's okay. We can strive for the B to B plus, and that's like a nice thing. When you commit to striving for an A or A plus, when that usually requires taking a step, taking a risk that could go wildly wrong, right? Like we're talking about with your event, I don't think it's going to go wildly wrong, for the record, but like doing something like this that, to my knowledge, no other community has ever done before, that means that if there are serious downsides or risks to doing a tribunal that gathers people to discuss Abraham's guilt or God's guilt or Sarah's guilt or Isaac's trauma, like there could be off the rails directions that are going to happen that you or your jurors, your participants are not anticipating. And you don't know until you've done it if that's going to happen. And so you're making a really courageous choice that I want to applaud. And I also want to name that, like, I believe we need to make courageous, risky choices in Jewish life. And I believe we need to open up that range of possibilities beyond C to B plus to sort of F to A or A plus. Like we need to bring in the like high magnitude rituals. And the thing about high magnitude is like it could be a high magnitude of positive results, or that this is where like absolute value comes in. It could be a high magnitude of negative result. And I get why folks avoid that. It's the same reason people avoid things like psychedelic substances, that like they create potentially amazingly positive and amazingly negative results. It's like we have a whole list of different societal issues that come down to whether we should take big risks or not. But I believe Jewish life needs it. And so I'd love to hear how you approach that piece of it, that willingness to just open up the possibility of things not going perfectly.
Yeah, everything you said, there is enormous risk, and it is sometimes very hard to hold, and it's very much behind the scenes. So I appreciate you naming that. Listen, I think I'm very lucky because I'm not beholden to a traditional synagogue board and diehard members and all that. And so for me, like at the center is, what does Goddess want from me right now? And that's a high stakes, high risk question every single time. What is she asking of me right now? I don't always hear it right. I don't always pull it off right. And that's a real bummer when that happens. And it would be nice to have the safety, as you say, perhaps to just always do B2C events. But I don't think my constitution would actually find that very enjoyable. I feel spiritually obligated to enter the ring of risk. And I feel also very fortunate because the first set of experiments we did, High Holidays 3 years ago, I really spent a long time before and thinking, what does Goddess want from me? And tried to create from that space. And folks walked out of that saying that was transformative. Like, I have never felt comfortable in a Jewish space before. And now for the first time I do. I never thought there was anything nutritive in Judaism before. And now I do. I mean, it was an overwhelming wave of response. And it was just a real blessing because it kind of reinforced like, okay, it's worth taking these risks. And when we have not, had a grand slam, people walking out saying, oh my gosh, that was beyond. That's hard. It is. But I think it's worth partnering with Goddess to try to say, what does she want from me in this moment? And if I fail, she knows I did my best, and I will keep trying to serve her. And that's that's sort of my orientation with this.
Well, it's interesting to think about different metaphors or analogies that we might use. I'm really interested in this line of inquiry here because I think for a long time I was thinking about Jewish practice as the version that we have seems not to be working for most Jews because they're not participating, they're not coming. My solution, I think, in a certain way was, could we figure out a different way to do it that would be, I wasn't talking this way, but I think in my mind, relatively consistent, relatively similar from week to week, but better, shorter. I've talked about, shorter, more powerful. As we've learned on this podcast, when we had Shefa Gold on, I really connected with chant. It made sense to me. And I said, well, what if there was more chant involved? And so thinking about it that way, and in a way, I think that's maybe the difference between a symphony playing a piece of classical music, where it's going to be relatively what you expect. There may be a little something special, a little twist, but if you like Beethoven's Ninth and you go to hear the Boston Philharmonic play Beethoven's Ninth, you're going to probably be pretty satisfied when you leave. Versus maybe something else where it's kind of a Fish concert or a Grateful Dead concert or something like that, where you don't know exactly what songs they're going to play, not just one, but you really don't know any, and they have a whole thing. And it could turn out that the songs that you really like aren't played, but on the other hand, you really like the band and you'll probably, have a good experience. And in my mind, I think I was saying there's classical music fans and there's Fish fans. Unfortunately, Judaism is only offering classical music. And if we could only offer more kind of Fish concerts, there would be a whole new clientele for Judaism. But I feel like this is introducing something new, which is almost saying, there's a third version. And I'm thinking about it like sports. Lex, I hope you'll like this.
I can't wait. I'm wearing a soccer jersey as we speak, and I'm always the sports angle. Dan, bring it.
Well, that if I go to a sports match, I don't know if my team's going to win. I don't know if my, you said get in the ring, Jericho. I don't know if my boxer's going to win, right? And if my team loses, there's an element where I'm disappointed, but if it was done well, if it's good sports, hopefully I still had an amazing heightened experience. And not everybody's looking for that. Like my relatives who love classical music, I don't think they're that into sports and vice versa. So I'm not trying to critique or criticize the dominant form of Judaism that's out there. I'm just trying to say it works for certain people and shouldn't claim that it can work for everyone if only we could figure out how to get them in the door or this or that. And this is helping me to say, wow, I think that there's a whole other clientele that's looking for something more like sports, something where there's a chance that it could go wrong. But even if it goes wrong, I'm going to come back again because I love the journey. So I guess I'm asking you, Jericho, what is your sense of what needs are out there among people? Because I also imagine like what you're offering doesn't solve everybody's needs too. So I'm also curious, like, who are you not serving? Not the people that are already happy going to synagogue, but like, is there room in your mind for different kinds of high holidays, different styles? And what might those be to address what you're hearing from people in terms of what they are needing and yearning for out there?
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you put it, and I agree with you. I think that the way Judaism exists is fantastic for the folks that is working for, and it's not working for most people, most Jews. So yeah, I think that I think Temple of the Stranger is doing exciting work, and I think there's a huge empty market for so many other folks and organizations to come in and to experiment and explore. And as to what people need, like I think we need to just sort of take off our Jewish hats for a moment and put on our, godly / human hats and say, like, what is present in my heart right now? What's been difficult in my family? What am I hearing from my friends? Those are Jewish needs. People talking about being lonely, people talking about being scared, people talking about being overwhelmed, people talking about being, fill in the blank. Like, that's what I understand spirituality and religion is present to address whatever those most pressing human struggles are, that it is a resource that can hold us and help us and clarify for us and connect us. When we think about what can Judaism do, I think there's a lot of value in stepping back from how it's been done. We have so many resources. They're all there. And let's just come back to, well, what do human beings need in this moment? And that's my understanding of the word mitzvah, of what is the divine imperative in this moment right now? What is fresh and alive and kicking for us as human beings? And once we have clarity on that, wow, amazing. We have these enormous library of resources from Judaism that we can pull from and curate to create an experience that will respond to those needs. This year in particular, people have been feeling big, difficult feelings, really big, difficult feelings. And that's what's present. And so I wanted to start by creating a space for some of those feelings. And that's what the Rosh Hashanah experience is, a deep dive into some really challenging things. And I know that it's so important when we do that, that we have good aftercare. Like, people need to be held in tenderness after that. So this year, I really wanted, in other years, we've had Yom Kippur also deep dive into the challenging stuff. And we'll do a little bit of that, but I hope that our Yom Kippur experience will use dance and chat and connection and meditation and live song to help people feel tenderly held. And some people, I think, are going to come to our Rosh Hashanah, have a big, profound experience, really feel some of the intensity that's been under the surface in their lives this year, have some of that air out, bear witness, and maybe work some of it through, and then come to Yom Kippur and feel tenderly held. And some folks will be like, I don't need the intensity of Rosh Hashanah. I'm just going to come to be tenderly held. And so that's really what I'm thinking about this year, that this year it's a year for Yom Kippur to be gentle, gentle in a fierce, fierce way, to really hold our hearts, particularly when it falls out in October. I just think we're going to need a lot of tenderness, and that's what I'm hoping to offer folks with our Yom Kippur experience.
I'm curious also to think about the multi-year vision of what's operating here, because I think you're cultivating something really powerful. And even on that front of, like, are people comfortable in a creative new space? Like, if they've gone to the wild radical experiment one year and it was awesome, they're probably going to give a little bit of leeway and trust your way the next time. And it builds this sensibility of, I'm actually going to be thrilled about this new and maybe confusing or like unexpected angle for holidays. So I'm kind of curious, like, and this is not a commitment to programmatic choices or whatever. Like, I'm kind of curious, are there particular other pieces that you might pick as, like, okay, this year it's not Binding of Isaac, but it's this. We're gonna have the shofar be the, like, I'm just, whatever it might be, and maybe it's less like specific examples and more, how do you think about these holidays in an ongoing multi-year piece? Because, like, part of me wants to say, somebody comes to one of these and never comes again and has a magical time, that's the win. That's terrific. And we don't need them to be like members or whatever. The other part of me is curious, like, might there be a multi-year kind of plan where we choose, these 10 pieces of Rosh Hashanah over a decade and have a cumulative kind of relationship to many liturgical pieces over a long time?
Yeah. I mean, the way that we're really thinking about that question right now is we really want to bring Temple of the Stranger across the country and across the world. And so how do you package something so wild and unknown and creative in a way that can be offered to communities who are totally new to that? So I think in New York, there's a lot of appetite for drama and the uncertainty. And I can imagine bringing in different pieces of the high holidays every single year. And the high holidays is always sort of our big marquee events. And so we invest a lot of creativity into them. And I can imagine that every year is different. Every year we have different needs. And there's such a wealth of resources in our liturgy and in our tradition to pull from. I think it'll be a long time before we'd have to repeat. Although I can imagine, again, there being a year where we're like, yes, we dothco want to repeat. We specifically do want to repeat. We're back in that same place again. And I am thinking about, well, how do we start to package this in a way that can be replicable? And that requires a little more uniformity. And how can we preserve the magic while creating that uniformity and creating something that can be planted in very different places than New York?
Can you talk about what that would look like to bring Temple of the Stranger across the country and the world? I mean, that was, when you were saying that, what occurred to me was, well, if the energies are always floating around, then you could have the high holidays any time of the year. And then maybe you could have high holidays experience 12 times a year in 12 different states at different months. Is that the model, or is there another model?
Well, Jericho mentioned that with the Yom Kippur Katan, with the once a month Yom Kippur, you're kind of allowed to do religiously.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that feels really interesting to me. I guess really, fundamentally, there's this question about like, how do you make a new approach to Judaism like this grow, especially when it's still in its early stages and being driven by the visionary who has the idea. Some people would say, and maybe this is your plan, like the easy way is to train other people to do it, X, Y, and Z, and I love to hear about what that looks like. But the other possibility, and this is really where it feels to me like this opportunity is out there to say, yeah, but we're a mystical community and the energy is always there. And so we actually can have Yom Kippur in March, and that'll be what we do in Seattle.
I love that. I hadn't exactly thought about it that way. And I love the idea of taking literal Temple of the Stranger on tour and lighting people's hearts on fire and showing them what it's possible to feel in a Jewish mystical experience. And I think that the Torah that I'm trying to offer people, the Torah that was given to me by my teachers, is so much more enormously large than me personally. And so I very much want to give folks the toolbox so that they can create these experiences themselves. And yes, train folks, plug folks into their own power and the resources they need so they can create these kinds of experiences. And maybe initially on a much smaller scale, experimenting on a grassroots level. There's so many gifted people all over the country, all over the world, who just need a few tools to be able to create transformation for their loved ones and for their communities. And I'm excited about Temple of the Stranger playing a role. I'm thinking in particular about, somebody who's a Reiki master in Kansas, and like they're Jewish and they're deeply spiritual and they know how to plug into spiritual energies, but they don't really know how to do that Jewishly. And what does it mean to use the spiritual powers they already have in a Jewish way? There's a very high bar to becoming a Jewish spiritual leader because we've sort of defined Jewish competency by competency in an enormous library of male patriarchal texts that you could only really gain competency in if you devote yourself totally to that and neglect many other essential parts of being human and being a leader. I think we really need to redefine what are the essentials, what are the tools you actually need, and for folks who are already spiritually gifted or already community organizers can take those tools and start to create experiences. And part of that is the tools, and part of that is also the chutzpah. I think we have a real, inferiority complex amongst progressive Jews in our country, and folks need to be infused with the chutzpah that as Jewish folks, as potential leaders, they have the power and the invitation to step into leadership.
I have a question that's less specifically about high holidays and more about Temple of the Stranger generally. And it relates to, we recently released an episode where we celebrated Hebrew Union College's elimination of their policy banning rabbinical students who are in relationships with non-Jews. And on your website, I mean, there's this glorious little thing you could miss. You've got some, FAQs, and the literal first one is, how Jewish do I have to be to attend an experience? And the answer is, you're welcome if you're Jewish, Jew-ish, Jew-ish, or not Jewish at all. Fun fact, our Rebbitzin is Ivri, but not Jewish. That is an unbelievably beautiful thing to have on a website. I'm saying that from my personal perspective, but I think also on behalf of a lot of people in various kinds of interreligious, interfaith, intercultural relationships, to not only say, which many websites say, like, interfaith folks are welcome here, but to be able to add, by the way, our Rebbitzin is Ivri and not Jewish. Now, I mean, we've talked with you a little bit about what Ivri means, and I think we should remind folks of what that is here. That's incredible. And it's also something that the Jewish world for a long time worked actively to prevent. There were decades of campaigns to prevent situations where the rabbi, the spiritual leader of a community, could or would post publicly that their partner is not Jewish. And that not only is that sort of a thing that's true, but it's an active good thing that might be appealing to couples who are in similar kinds of relationships. But I'd love to hear about how that plays into your work, and maybe, again, a little bit of a reminder about what Ivri even means.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so heartsore when I think about all those generations of gatekeeping and judgment against folks who are married to non-Jews. I mean, I just really sense the contours of trauma that led to those perspectives. And I feel so heartsore for the harm that people caused because of those wounds they carried. And yes, I feel really proud that my partner is Ivri, but not Jewish. And not only that, I don't say this explicitly on the website, but like most of the Torah I deliver to the world is Torah that emerges from the portal of my chavrita with my partner. Deeply, deeply informed by my partner, who is not Jewish, but is my soulmate. What a gift that I find that to be for my own life, and what a tragedy if I wasn't able to share that. So that's really important. And yes, so I call the Torah that I teach and the path that I walk the Ivri path. The Ivri is the most ancient name for our people. Before we were Jews, we were Israelites. Before we were Israelites, we were Ivri. Ivri is sort of the Abrahamic and Sarah umbrella. It means boundary crosser. And what I am trying to express when I talk about the Ivri path is like, this is a path that you don't have to be Jewish to walk. It is based in Jewish ancestral wisdom. You could be a Jewish Ivri, you could be a non-Jewish Ivri. And it's a way of sort of sidestepping some of the thorny questions about, is Judaism a closed practice or an open practice? It's saying, here, there's a mystical tradition that is open to people of all backgrounds. We want to offer it to people of all backgrounds. And that's what we're doing with this work in Ivri.
I am curious, like, how you answer people, because I get this kind of question all the time when we talk about Jewish wisdom, which is something that I talk about a lot now in my job at Living Camper Foundation for Living Torah. But when you're talking about, like, this Jewish stuff, or in your case, this Ivri stuff, is an amazing path to making your life better, people will often say, but aren't there other good paths? Like, why this one? Right? And how do you answer that question?
Yeah, there are so many wonderful paths. This is a path that has been transformative for me, and I want to share it with folks who might find it transformative. It's certainly not for everybody. I hear that loud and clear from plenty of commenters on Instagram. And clearly, it has touched a lot of people and has delivered a message that is new to a lot of people, even though it's actually quite ancient. Judaism has been just slathered over by so much trauma and so much chet, so much missing the mark with patriarchy and other forms of oppression. And the Ivri path is really trying to dig deep, 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 deep beyond all that to some of the most ancient core truths that our ancestor held and that the mystics maintained, often in secret, throughout the ages, and saying, hey, like, this is a treasure, just like there are Buddhist treasures in the world, there are Christian treasures in the world, there are Muslim treasures in the world. This is a Jewish treasure. And, my teacher, Reb Zalman, would talk about each of the world traditions having different vitamins. And some people have a vitamin D deficiency and they really need that. And some people, whether they're Jewish by birth or not, have a craving, a bodily craving for some of this wisdom. And it's a great honor and joy to get to offer that to the world. I think one of the things we have discovered in our generation more than ever is that people want a sense of rootedness. People want to be connected to something older than themselves. And Judaism is certainly that. And it's not right for everybody, but it is a connection to something ancient. And I think folks are feeling rootless, and they're feeling a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose, a lack of context. Our world is so swiftly changing and sometimes so overwhelming. And having a sense of being connected to something much older than yourself, something that has endured through other times of tribulation, something that just has been cooked in time, I think it can be a real source of strength for folks. And I absolutely would not push it on anybody. I think that it's totally possible and wonderful to live life as an agnostic, untied to any world religion. And I think some folks would feel deeply nourished by this if they knew that it was actually there.
So I want to take a crack at something I'm always thinking about. And we first talked about this with Shira Stutman way back when. Something I call, I wish I had this itis. I think that a lot of people, especially in smaller communities than New York, smaller Jewish communities than New York, which is every Jewish community, and especially in more traditional synagogue contexts than yours, there's a tendency to hear about really amazing new creative initiatives, programs, etc., and to say, I wish I had this, but that can't work here. Often that may be true, by the way. What Dan said before about the innovator's dilemma, about how like certain things don't actually lend themselves well to established institutions, that's the case. And the creative, amazing initiatives that can happen in New York City may not be possible in other kinds of Jewish communities. And I really want to work against that impulse. I think it's a non-generative, like not helpful impulse, because even in a space that has, a smattering of a few Jews and no synagogue, like I do believe that somebody could listen to this episode, hear about what you're doing with this amazing, Isaac Tribunal. I really think that even in spaces where that identical kind of thing couldn't arise, there's something there. And so I'd love to ask you, just for people that are in drastically different kinds of contexts, I mean, who are listening and having that reaction of this is delightful and awesome, but we could never do that here. What might they be able to do here?
That's a very exciting question. And I would love to give it a lot more thought. But I do think, even without being able to refer you to certain, prepackaged offerings, that there are some things folks can do. First of all, like the lowest hanging fruit, even in the most progressive synagogues, I find male God language. Like, why are we using male God language still? I mean, we can use it, but why isn't there an equal amount of female non-binary God language? Also, if you have never in your daily life thought of God as king, if that's not something your friends and your community talk about, why are you talking about God as king on Yom Kippur? Like, sit with the language. To sit with the language, I think, is sort of the lowest hanging fruit. And how do I tap into what the ancestors were actually trying to say and translate that into language that is urgent? Not language that is vanilla and will make everybody happy and be completely accessible and totally pleasant to everybody. I think that this is provocative language, but how do we translate this into things that speak to people's lives? So that's like one simple thing. And then the other directive is pay attention to the body. What are our bodies doing when we gather in Jewish community to pray or to connect? Mostly we're sitting in chairs and staring straight forward. And I don't think that's optimal for having a transformational experience, right? Like, how can we use dance? How can we use chant? How can we rearrange the arrangement of how people are sitting in this space so that we start to bring a more embodied experience? I think that those are two really simple directions people can explore and get a lot out of before we even get to some of the deeper questions about how should we structure a service in the first place.
I want to take a little trip back to the fall holidays for a moment before we end this episode. And I want to think for a minute about Sukkot. From my perspective, it comes too soon after the high holidays. And by the way, that's not historically what happened. I mean, it is and it isn't. What happened was that Sukkot used to be the really important holiday, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were these minor holidays probably that were helping the priests get ready for Sukkot, because there was a big pilgrimage and all the people were coming and they had to do a lot of cleaning and a lot of purifying. But over time, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur became huge. And then I think, and this is how I feel, I think this is how every rabbi feels, that it's just too exhausting. You're just completely spent by the time Sukkot comes along. So I'm wondering, what our options are as you see it for Sukkot and for making meaning out of that holiday. Like in my mind, one is move the holiday to some later time. By the way, we've talked about this in the Northern Kingdom. There was a holiday on the 15th of Cheshvan, which is the next month. That was kind of their version of Sukkot. So maybe we just move it a month, and that would be, creating some space for it. Or maybe it's something else. But I guess what I'm asking also is, what is kind of the spiritual work that Sukkot ought to be doing for us? And practically speaking, realistically speaking, can we actually get it to do that work for us, given how exhausted everybody is by the end of the high holidays?
I mean, I certainly feel that. Like, I do not feel like I have the resources to pull off a Sukkot after our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I think Sukkot is a gold mine of energy for people if we could figure out a way to do it. I mean, I think it's called Sukkot, not Sukkah. Like, it is, I think, a communal holiday. I don't think we have invested in the infrastructure to create Sukkot. I think that Sukkot in today's world probably wants to be Burning Man, the Jewish version of Burning Man. And that's going to take a lot of investment. And I hope somebody will step up and help us do that. And I think it could be phenomenal. I also think that, another way to think about Sukkot is the opportunity to connect with nature. And maybe every rabbi and spiritual leader needs to just think of Sukkot as a private retreat where we connect back with nature and invite their congregants to do the same. Maybe Dafka specifically, we go in the opposite direction, move away from community. Everybody goes off on their own individual meditative connect with nature journey. I think that might be what has to step in until we have the ability to create a more communal experience of gathering in these booths outside together.
Well, wouldn't it be such a great thing? Like, I think that the rabbis would stop complaining if it turned out that they didn't have to organize this.
I was just going to say that. Same idea. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody else was organizing this amazing Burning Man for Sukkot, and they could be done with the high holidays and then go to be guests at something else that somebody else organized and spent all their time and complained all the time about how they had to organize their Burning Man and all that. But it was two different people working on it. And the rabbis actually got to take a break, and everybody else got that. And whoever didn't want to go to the Burning Man, yeah, like you're saying, would have a more in-the-home sort of experience just for their family, like Passover is. It feels like a really interesting direction to me.
From our mouths to God's ears.
And this brings all three of the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, in conversation with one another. I mean, I'm on the record about 100 times saying of the entire calendar year, the holidays, at least in their current form, that speak least to me are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Like, they're just the hardest for me as a participant. Sukkot, I think, is absolutely awesome. It is dispersed. It is decentralized. It has the characteristics that like Passover Seders do, in that people, without even thinking much about it, they don't presume that the rabbi is going to lead everything. It didn't really occur to me growing up for both Passover and Sukkot in my like non-Orthodox community. It was like surprising to me when I learned there were services at synagogue for Passover and Sukkot. Because like, why? Like Passover is the thing you do around a table with friends and loved ones. And Sukkot is the thing you do in a backyard with the fun, like, structure you make. Like, I guess synagogue services, but like Sukkot, especially, like, you're in the synagogue building, like, why? And I still kind of feel that, like, even though I now intellectually understand that there is liturgy for Sukkot that people say in the services inside, like, I still kind of think that I was right as a child to think that way. And so the answer of rabbis, spiritual leaders, et cetera, are overwhelmed, and so they need a breath at Sukkot. That is true. To me, it points to one of two things, or maybe both of these things. Either Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur should be way less clergy-centric, so that they're not all totally exhausted at the end, so that they could do meaningful things for Sukkot and, Simchat Torah, Shmini Atzeret, those kinds of things. Or we do what Dan said, which is say, okay, Sukkot, clergy out. We're snoozing, and we believe in you. And maybe 2 months before we're overwhelmed, we have some coaching sessions. We meet with you. We help you think through what you might do with this. But like, yep, fully yours. And we're not gonna like bother you about it. We're not gonna do the look over the shoulder and make sure everything fits the perfect way. We're not gonna make sure you choose the right melodies or you do the right order. We're like, it's yours. I think that would be an unbelievably useful exercise, both for the clergy to realize like, oh, wow, I let my community take this and it went fine. It's not all about us. I'm saying this as a rabbi. Like, we're actually not the only people in the world that can lead stuff. And I think we forget that sometimes. And so it's a good exercise for us to see that succeed. And it'd be a great exercise for all of the people in the community who think to themselves, I couldn't lead an event. I go to stuff and I'm a proud participant in holiday rituals. How could I be somebody to lead? And then I think they would do it and be like, oh, okay, if I chose a nigun I like, we schmoozed a bunch, got some food, we looked at like one short little text or whatever, like we did whatever we did, and I did a good job, and I am capable. I think it would be great in both directions. So I'm kind of curious if you would agree that we might merit that kind of a turn with how we approach the holidays. And maybe it's not just about the holidays, but more generally.
Yeah, I think that that's super insightful, and I agree. I mean, we have a different calendar than our ancestors did, right? It's punctuated by different things. I think there's a lot of value in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. People have come back from the summer vacations. There's a new start of the school year. I think there's a lot to be gained from a holiday that helps us focus and clarify and review the year that's passed and prepare for the year to come. And absolutely, I think Sukkot is a time for other kinds of leaders to step forth. I mean, Sukkot, maybe more than any of the other holidays, is deeply rooted in earth, in the natural world, in the rain. Like, just set out a dang sprinkler and let everybody run in it. I mean, what a gorgeous water ceremony. Like, that's what we need. I think that the skills we need, the Jewish skills we need to build powerful Sukkot experiences are much more easily accessible than people know. And there are people in the community who are not rabbis, who have never been to Jewish day school, who have 90% of the skills they need, and with a little bit of encouragement and a little bit of context, could absolutely step in and create beautiful and powerful experiences for our communities.
As we close, we're a few weeks out from Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur and then Sukkot and then the rest of the year. As folks are, sitting in their car listening to us or heading off to dinner or whatever they're doing next after this podcast episode, what would you encourage them to be meditating on, sitting with, leaning into?
This is a time of year that is ripe with powerful energy. And if in your surroundings you can't access teachers or guides who can help you find the doorway in, you have a portal in your own heart. I just invite you to find one thing, one idea, one word, one concept that has something to do with the high holidays that resonates in your heart. And I invite you to consider making that your spiritual practice for this high holiday season. If you'd like to do all the other ritual and liturgy, wonderful, do that. But to really focus on one simple thing that feels true to you, and to ask the ancestors and to ask Goddess and to ask your own truest self, what do I need to learn from this concept or word or idea in this moment? What gifts does this have to offer me? And to open to the possibility of being in direct communion with the energies that become accessible to us in this liminal time. I think folks might be really surprised by how much goodness there is waiting for them if they open their hearts and ask for it.
Thank you so much, Jericho Vincent, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We want to remind you, on Yeshiva courses, on Yeshiva mini courses, do not miss them. They, in some cases, have started, and in other cases are about to start. Head to judaismunbound.com/classes to register. Financial aid is available. We hope that you will give them a shot. And we also have some more full semester courses coming up beginning in just a few weeks. Well, their registration will begin in just a few weeks. They will start in a little over a month. But we also want to encourage you before we go to be in touch with us. Send us your questions, your visions, your ideas, your Temple of the Stranger spin-offs that you're going to pull off in your community, whatever you're called to send. And you can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram handles. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, there's our website, judaismunbound.com, where you can find the show notes for this episode, all sorts of other resources. Check out Elul Unbound that's going on right now. Lots of good stuff. And there's also our email inboxes. So send us a note at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we'd make is that we're deeply, deeply appreciative if you're able to support us financially, which you can do on either a monthly recurring basis or just via a one-time gift at judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.